Welcome, Complexity Weekend, November 2021 cohort. I'm Daniel, and I'm here with one of our facilitators, Stephen. So, Stephen, who are you, and what has your complexity journey been?
Thank you. I'm currently based in Toronto. I am interested in complexity, particularly since getting into the world of community development and the way that life is not as simple as we might imagine. So that was kind of how I started to get into that. I'd been interested in processes before, but I was more interested in streamlining processes and making them cleaner. I was worked in process chemistry and also the processes for graphic studios. But since getting into the world of community development and trying to understand how people can engage in that process and to try and make it more empowering, you sort of find things are a lot messier than first thought. So my journey in initially was into that world and trying to understand human interactions and social systems in terms of people and where they're at.
Cool, thank you. So, across these different areas you've worked in, how do you see, work with, and communicate complexity in different settings and in diverse teams?
Good question. So the communication of complexity is a tricky one because there's complexity in terms of the fact that things are complex as opposed to being simple and open to goal directedness in a way that is often the default in the West. Set the goal, work towards the goal. So one of the big ones that comes up in, say, when you challenge those ways of working with complexity is basically the problem that the route towards that goal can cause more problems. You could be trampling people on the way that actually are able to tell you about some things about the local contextuality which wouldn't have been available, and that you should steer a different course. But often people are so busy to get to their goal and so happy to get to their goal that they don't realize all the damage that can be done. So I think initially it was more of a risk mitigation approach to complexity. And I hadn't really known about the more technical side of it until more recently. And then that's when the sort of complexity science comes in, where, okay, there's the field of complexity in terms of systems which are complex and mathematics that can be looked at with that. And what's interesting is that whole field is catching up with and being able to contribute to the contextual fields.
Great point about how there's been changes in the conversation between the theory and the application of complexity. So, hopefully, some of the people who are curious about that are here in the weekend with us. So, what makes you
Absolutely.
excited to be a facilitator for Complexity Weekend? And you're a facilitator in the November 2021 cohort. So, what made you want to be a facilitator this time and return to participate in Complexity Weekend?
Well, I felt it was time. This is going to be the first time I've facilitated at one of the larger events, but I've had a chance to facilitate the heartbeats, which is what happens those months in between. And I was exploring how to facilitate interactive sessions. And it was actually really useful as well because it gave me a chance to explore how that works with a group of people and learn, and went back to the drawing board and revised some things. So I'm excited about being able to um, bring together some of my work in the community around contextuality and something I call social topographies, or the social landscape in which people are embedded, um, and to share that around how that might inform the use of community embedded teams, how that might inform work in organizations, which are other, maybe teams or other types of structures. So to think about how do we ground and how can these things be thought of? And one thing that can inform that, as well as complexity being part of complexity science, it's also part of these non linear complex adaptive systems work. And as you're also very, very heavily involved in. While I won't go into it so much, the field of active inference and the way that we make meaning actually draws on complexity as well. So it actually turns out that these things aren't a strange, out there idea, but actually might be very core to how we operate. The way that we infer things in the world, the way that we understand being in the world, starts to then inform how we need to think about complexity in our engagements, because it's actually not what happens when we get into the outliers. It's actually probably center stage.
I have a lot to add on that, but I'll ask the last question, maybe give a thought then. Just to convey this in broad strokes for those who might be coming to a CW for their first time or returning, what can people expect from your interactive sessions and mentorship during the pre-weekend and during the November weekend itself?
Okay, good question. So in terms of the sessions, I would be doing work where it would be more around helping with sense making and giving a framework or a session where you could take some thematic question and try to find the meaningfulness in that, and to relate that to a couple of different scales. The scale of what it presents at in whatever ecological niche or space that is being thought of, but also maybe go into the dynamics of a particular moment and reflect on that and unpack that, which can be done through metaphors of expression. It can be done through a spatial activity, and then also to bring that into a slightly larger scale, to ground it in some of the work I do with something called infusion space. So in the session, I'll invite people to think about something that's meaningful, go into a particular moment and how that fits into a bigger picture. And there will be only so far we can get in the session, but I'll share some of that. And then that same thing can also be used to look at the models or the mental models or the groundings, the different levels at which and different scales which a team might be trying to form. And it might give hopefully it will be able to help people look at the different intentionalities, because often people are looking at something, they think they're talking about the same thing, but they may be, they haven't really sort of talked about what it's like that they're trying to do. And by unpacking what it's like, they may get a better sense of the kind of models, the kind of ways that they're embodying some of these concepts.
Awesome. I'll give just two last thoughts and then you can give any comments as well. So the first is like this introduction video, it's just a starting point. We have the whole pre-weekend and weekend, but then just like you said, even your session and your office hours and all your interactions, the weekend is just the starting point for teams, relationships, communities. So it's kind of this cool way that complexity, we're just always beginning and it's just a process. And then the second piece, just something I've always appreciated from your participation and facilitation, multi-scale systems, nonlinear, non-equilibrium, these get thrown around a lot. They're, $5 words. They're things you could get your advanced studies in for many, many years. And then how do we connect those big topics to embodiment and communication and meaning and metaphor? Because that's where we're at day to day. So it's just a cool connection, and it really speaks to that connection and conversation between theoretical and applied complexity.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, actually, those are the sort of questions probably keep me thinking too much at night. But there is a real resonance between those questions, because a lot of the stuff that we kind of intuit and know, and as you know, one of the things that some of this work brings to mind is it's not all sitting ready to go in our brain. It's somehow being created and something like that. And this non-linear, non-equilibrium steady state starts to give plausible ways in which we can sort of have an unconscious and a conscious, and how these things can be happening. So And embodiment then is really really useful to be able to play with that. Is to say, okay, how can we make this work with the body and space, and performing as we're doing, somehow tractable? How can that be kept relatively simple, and allow our complex processes to have a fighting chance, if that makes sense? So we can keep some of the mechanisms that how we're making sense of things and knowing where we're making sense of things. The complexity's got a chance to be tractable. The challenge is if we're talking at cross purposes, even around things which have been kind of nailed down, we can get into a lot of conflict, literally because we've got a different set of priorities that we're trying to optimize around. So I think this is something that there's a real opportunity with this particular community, because these questions are really being asked here. So there's lots of people who are like interested in how to work across scale, how to for a lot of people in most organization work, this is very, very, very new, almost paradigm shifting. But in this community, there's a lot of that conversation happening, and it's very fertile. So that's why I'm really excited to be able to have these conversations. And some of them I probably wouldn't have in other contexts, because people might not be ready for that yet. So I think this is where it's going to be really interesting to allow people to connect and frame where they're coming from.
Thanks for the answer, and I'll just give the last question, then we'll end the recording. What advice would you provide to a participant?
Okay, well, my advice would be to have a chance to explore with Gather the space, and recognize that this space is interesting because it's what we can make it. The social technology is actually the social way that we interact on here, and the space starts to become kind of our own kind of social space, a bit like when you're in a bar or something. You create your own little environment, and that's different to, I think, a lot of online experiences. So that's get a feel for that, find out what places you kind of feel kind of relaxed in, and use your imagination to kind of create that. So if you want to have a certain conversation in the house next door or in the bar, sort of enjoy that. So that's one thing to do, is to sort of play with the space and the way that you interact, and use that in your conversations, and then also get connected to the key base. That's another place which is going to be working well for participants. Ask lots of questions, and yeah, just generally maybe have a pen and paper and sketch little ideas down as you're going, because I think you'll find a lot of really fertile avenues opening up. But just give it a little bit of time, because things will start to find resonance.
Excellent advice, Stephen. Thank you for this introduction video. Looking forward to seeing you during the pre-weekend and at the weekend.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks. Peace.
Peace.